So, Dr. Lucy, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule here when you're visiting us in Tanzania to sit and talk to us a little bit about what we need to do as a continent to really bring in, to rope in the private sector, to ensure that they are partners in our development journey into sustainable development for the continent. So to get us started, Dr. Lucy, let's start this conversation by ensuring that our audience listening to us and watching us today is on the same page when discussing the private sector and its role in sustainable development in the continent. Does the private sector contribute to the SDGs and the 2064 Africa We Want agenda? And if so, how?
Thank you so much, Namwaka, for the invitation. It's an honor to be here. I've watched other editions of InFocus, and I feel very honored to be on set with you today. Yes, the SDGs and the Agenda 2063 have always been a conversation within the diplomatic circle, the technical circle with the government. But there has been a deliberate effort to draw in the private sector. And even though the private sector is being drawn in, we're not doing it at the pace that we expect should be happening. And that's what gave the mandate of organizations like the APSS, which is about drawing in the private sector. We can see that the SDGs have 17 goals, and the Agenda 2063 has 7 aspirations and 20 goals. If you take the SDGs and overlap it with the Agenda 2063 aspirations in a matrix form, it's amazing how they align. Wow. It actually goes up pop. If I advise that all the viewers take time, look at the 17 SDGs, look at the 7 aspirations of the Agenda 2063 with the 28 goals, overlap them in a matrix form, and you can see awesome alignment in themes and patterns. Now, if you take those themes and patterns and we look at the private sector as the employer of labor, if we look at the private sector as paying taxes to the government to provide services to the people, and if we look at the private sector as enabling an environment of competition, transparency, accountability, then we start to see that that alignment of the SDGs and the Agenda 2063 goals and aspirations, that the private sector also has integrated reporting, which requires the private sector, especially the mega corporates that are listed entities and those that are looking for funds internationally and locally, to show contribution beyond financials in terms of impact on their host communities and countries as their CSR.
Absolutely.
And they are also expected to report their annual reportings in terms of sustainability reporting, which is showing these things that they participate in. Then the magic on it all is if you see a situation whereby all these 17 goals are actually CSR-like things.
Yeah, they are.
They are.
They are.
And the 7 aspirations are also sustainability things. Imagine a situation whereby the private sector is drawn in and the government mentions their priority areas and the private sector adopts these projects as their CSR. It's a win-win.
It's a win-win, absolutely.
But that connection has not been made. And that is why the goals are not as successful in being achieved. The milestones are still far apart. I was in a conference in New York last year and they said the SDGs are 80% off target. Wow, and 2030 is next door.
Right around the corner.
Yes, but if we try this, it's so mind-blowing if it's done. So if the governments do that and they call the private sector and say, these are our priority areas, come and adopt them. And for the private sector, you can co-brand these projects as your CSR.
Absolutely.
And as you take them, the investments you make, you can get tax credits. So it's a win-win for everybody.
Win-win. So then, Dr. Lucy, how do the current governance structures in Africa support the private sector?
Thank you very much. Some governments are trying very hard. We must commend them. And some governments have also come up with industries that have high spillover to other industries. There's an East African country that most of us fly their aircrafts. And if you look at that economy, they have linked it to hospitality. They've created a lot of jobs and the value chain around that aviation area. And even many of the global production companies are making that a hub as part of their value chain. So those kind of things, and these are the things that AfCFTA gives us opportunity to do. So the way the governments do right now with the private sector is the issue of regulation, the issue of taxation, access to finance, mobility within, in and out, and also reasonable stability of the foreign exchange so that when you have investments, you can repatriate your income and all that. But when you have made sales as a foreign entity and you're trying to repatriate and there are bottlenecks to conversion of the sales into foreign exchange, then the investor is now challenged to charge at the FX rate to save themselves from the exchange risk. So these are some of the issues, and then also there are collaborations that some of the governments offer, like the PPP, which is like invitation, come, let's join together and deliver some services. Governments may not have the fund long-term for that. They may not be able to set aside that sum in a large quantity without affecting the net worth of that country. But the private sector can mobilize funds, and also government may not have the technical capacity to deliver those projects. So coming together, everybody brings in what they have, and then the government can make long-term commitments to these private sector entities and then deliver what is required.
Thank you for that, Dr. Lucy. And you mentioned already the African Continental Free Trade Agreement.
Yes.
So I would like to jump to that, since you already mentioned it. And so this agreement has been pointed to as a key factor to potentially propel us as a continent to realize our collective aspiration towards the Africa we want, while highlighting the importance of the private sector.
Yes.
How has this agreement enabled the private sector so far? And are there gaps that this agreement can potentially address in terms of some of the issues that you were just pointing to?
Thank you. This agreement gives us a chance to be the largest ever market bloc continental since the World Trade Organization.
Wow, that's big.
That's big.
Huge.
Very huge. And this agreement also gives us an opportunity to unleash the natural resources that Africa is so blessed with.
Abundantly blessed.
Abundantly. Now, this also gives us an opportunity because Africa is fragmented. One continent, we have Francophone, Anglophone, Maghreb, all of them.
Portuguese, yes.
Exactly. But we're not that integrated.
Absolutely.
So we cannot benefit from the privilege of synergy. 1 + 1 + 1 should be 7, not 3 or 4.
Wow,
so
I like that.
AfCFTA also gives us the opportunity to talk to one another and focus on areas of excellence, optimize those areas of excellence. And everybody has something to bring to the table.
Absolutely.
So, and if you look at Africa, we also, most people think Africans are just black people. We're actually the whole spectrum, from one end to the other, we're all Africans. You know, from all the colors, you get them.
And you get every shade.
Every shade.
Every single shade.
Every single shade all over the world. This is our first home as human beings, you know, Africa, the continent. So this is a momentous time in history, but however, we have had also historical constraints in the continent that has made us unique from, apart from the other continental blocks. We've had historical issues, the Atlantic slave trade, the trans-Saharan slave trade, we have had the wars, we have had all these things. So our situation is similar, but is uniquely different. We are also starting at the last phase. We're like the last frontier. Other continents had made great improvements over the years, so we're starting at the end, but that does not put us at a disadvantage. It puts us as an advantage, seeing the mistakes that others have done and make sure we can learn from them and do better, so that if you, and you also know how life goes on in cyclical pattern. When Africa masters it, when the other continents have issues, they can come back and say, this is how Africa did it. So organizations like mine, Africa Private Sector Summit, is about seeing this wonderful opportunity we have and making sure that we don't miss it. So we looked at some conventions and protocols that have already been signed by the various countries of the AU, but have not been implemented in terms of the regional economic communities and also the AfCFTA protocols. So we brought them out as 24 basic rights for the private sector. That if, and these rights have already been approved and ascended to, is just bringing them out to implement and agreeing that these are our focus.
Right.
So that gap is there, and it's about creating the enabling business environment. In the Northern Hemisphere and other developed countries, the private sector is thriving. The private sector controls the economy. If you get the top 100 companies they want to meet, they ask the president to come.
And they get a meeting.
Yes, but in Africa, the private sector is struggling. We're going cup in hand to the governments to ask for concessions and all that. But we hope that the governments will see that the private sector is the goose that lays the golden egg. Feed the goose and you get the golden egg. We just mentioned the issue of the SDGs, the issue of AfCFTA, Agenda 2063. We just mentioned that when private sector is thriving, they pay taxes to the government in terms of personal income tax because they create jobs and also corporate taxes. Then also they can mobilize funds like we said in the PPP. Apart from that also, when the private sector is thriving, it's like the way the bee is attracted to the nectar. When the environment is thriving, there's bloom, you get more bees coming. So when the environment is thriving, you don't need to travel and do investment promotion. Investors will come. So we hope that in the work of APSS, the Pan-African and our partners, Pan-African, because we work by the Ubuntu approach of Africa. I am because we are, and we are because each and every one of us is. So APSS does not work alone. We have an ecosystem approach to dealing with this, and we have some partners that have walked the journey with us. One is the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We also have the Africa Business Council. Then we have the Africa Education Trust Fund, which is about our educational system. Our original education systems were a colonial arrangement to make us do certain things. And now if we want to take our position, we need to unlearn and learn the right way for productivity.
And relearn.
Exactly. And then all that. Then we also have the AAA SME, which is the All Africa Association of Small and Medium Enterprises. When Africa discovers the power in the SME like China has done, there's no stopping us. And AfCFTA has a key to that. And the business environment is critical to doing that.
Dr. Lucy, you've pointed to so many interesting observations and facts about our uniqueness as a continent. And so maybe I'd like to now tap your brain a little bit more in terms of how can our governments, the public sector, really work with the private sector to promote both good leadership and sustainable development? And you already mentioned in our conversation the use of PPPs.
Yes.
Yeah, public-private partnerships. Are they still relevant? And if so, are they still practical? And can you share maybe an example of a successful PPP in terms of what has worked and maybe a lesson that we can take from that?
Yes, thank you. Interesting question. Okay, the PPP, very much so. Very much required. If you notice most of the PPP arrangements on the continent, the contractors are from other continents where they have grown. There's a reason for that. Now, we as Africa, if you try to travel across Africa, our flight connections are not very optimal. Somebody that is trying to travel from
to the north,
yes,
you have to go to Europe and then come back down.
Thank you very much. And if you also are an SME, you're producing something in Dar es Salaam and you want to sell to somebody in Conakry, you're supposed to have a direct access, whether by train or something. It will go around and it will take time, and by the time it arrives in destination, it's too expensive. And then there's also the issue of convertibility of the currency. So these are some of the issues and the constraints in terms of how the governments, but governments generally for PPP, we have seen that we have need in telecommunications, transportation, logistics, healthcare, education. These are areas where there's high need for PPP arrangements because, first of all, the methods, the technical skills, the resources to mobilize that is missing. So PPP is even more important for us when we are going to the AfCFTA arrangement, integrated economy as a continent. And these areas are heavy duty equipment undertakings, and they require long-term funding, and they require contractual stability. So these PPP arrangements are very important, even more so now as we're trying to unbundle and unleash Africa. That's one side. Then the second part, you asked me to say examples of PPPs that are working. That will create some political that will create some political issues, and I don't want to appear to favor anybody.
I completely understand.
However, I would just like to say that PPP arrangements exist in many countries in Africa, especially the fast-growing countries. We've seen them launching bridges, we've seen them launching rail lines, we've seen them launching, even the airline, hospitality, and even hospital chains because of hospital tourism. In Africa, let's say South Africa is a good role model in terms of PPP. They have had enduring PPP. But for you to appreciate that enduring PPP, you need to walk back to history of South Africa,
which is
and see that
a unique history.
Unique history. Then then we now look at Egypt. We looked at Rwanda. We see Kenya. We see my country, Nigeria. We see all that. So these PPP arrangements, they're all over the place. But if we really want to see it, America, the UK, and Asia, Singapore, Malaysia, they have very deep practices in Asia. Japan as well. Now, what makes them work? That's the last part of your question. What makes them work is very important to, it's nice to aspire to have PPP. We all know it's happening. But why I didn't want to mention the example is that there are some PPP arrangements on the continent that are very, very turbulent, that have been schizophrenic, and that has made the citizens very upset. What makes it that? We need verifiable data such that the projects are need-based. The projects need to be verified based on data and observed need that these are our priority sectors, and there must be some conversation with the citizenry that this is what we need. Then in that case, the first buy-in is secured. Then the second one, there needs to be openness and transparency in the contracting process. So that it's competitive, and we're looking all over the world, and we're looking at history, and we're looking at the people and the organizations that they have capacity to do that. That's on our part. Then the other side is that the governments must have stability, commitment to contractual obligations. Many PPPs are like 25, 30, 50 years. It must not be based on the party in the government. It must be a nation-state commitment. And then
non-regime-based.
Non-regime-based. Then the fourth one is the citizens own the PPPs. They are the shareholders of those PPPs. And when you involve them in the oversight, governance, and holding the partners accountable, then everybody has a stake in it, and it would work. I have seen an example of a PPP that worked where I went to a country and I was going to the airport and I saw the toll fee, and I told the driver, this toll fee is high. And he was defending the government that that toll fee was appropriate, that I should look at the highway, I should see the people cleaning the grass, I should look at the ambulance points, I should see the phone lines and all that, and that price is fair, and that he was at the last annual general meeting of that organization. That's a taxi driver defending his government. I was a visitor, and I said the toll was expensive, and he was defending it because he felt a sense of ownership. And he has liberty to go and attend the annual general meeting, see the accounts, and when they have vacancies, they advertise, and anybody qualified can. So that makes it work.
And so maybe if you can advise us, what are some of the most effective ways that the public sector can leverage to mobilize private sector finance for development?
Thank you. One way is remove policy somersaults.
Like that, policy somersaults.
It's not like the wind blows kind of situation. Commit long term, stick to it. The other one is regulation. In regulation, let there be engagement. Create feedback with the private sector and put yourself in their shoes and listen, and then also explain situations. Then the other side is the issue of taxation, multiple taxation. The taxation should not be overtaxing the taxable. It should be expanding the tax bracket by allowing other people to enter into the tax net. Because when you overtax the tax bracket, they get fatigue.
Right, absolutely.
And nature happens, they start to evade, and then there's no resources. So that aspect, then the aspect I spoke about, the enabling business environment, non-tariff trade barriers. One big example, for instance, for our SMEs, land border immigration issues. They're trying to haulage of goods, and you're trying to haul your goods to another side, and then they stop you, and then you're held back. They don't see the big picture. So our immigration needs to be onboarded into the issues of AfCFTA, land borders and ports, port congestion for our products. And many times when the private sector is importing, is a line of credit. They have sourced the funds, they have got the materials, and they're supposed to pay back. And there's an expected moratorium by which they should produce and make sales. But if the goods are held up at one location, then maturity starts and they're paying interest on something they have not even gotten. So these kind of things are really disincentives, and that's what the APSS is really advocating for. Then the issue of free movement of goods and people, logistics is very important. I think just engagement with the private sector and some of the bureaucratic bottlenecks to getting things done, it's really a problem.
So Dr. Lucy, thank you. And in this conversation, you've already pointed to some of the opportunities, of course, for the private sector and the constraints that the private sector faces. And we've talked about mainly the external constraints.
Yes.
What is happening external to the private sector. But I'm curious to know, are there any limitations that are within the private sector themselves? I mean, just if we're talking about the private sector, do they face their own stops that limit them from participating in the development agenda on the continent?
Yes, now you're entering my former space of work. I consulted for the private sector. I supported them in many things. And the private sector has constraints. The private sector does not operate in a vacuum. They operate in the society. So the social issues within the environment affect them. We have spoken about the macro issues which are external, but there are the micro issues which are internal to the private sector. One of it is our attitude to work for business people. We need, as a culture of people in different dimensions, to learn the attitude of being at work and being accountable for resources and people at your disposal. That culture of myself for myself can kill businesses, and it can be very hurting. Many SMEs find it difficult to find trustworthy employees who will appreciate and honor the commitments that they have. Generally, most SMEs complain that their employees are trying to undermine their business and move next door and set up their own businesses. So thereby you see that the SME, the founder, the CEO, the person that is starting the SME is doing almost everything for fear that one of the workers will just walk away. So as a people, ability to hold trust for our employers and see where we're working as where we are today, and not allow our personal ambitions jeopardize another person's ambition by starting a dream. That aspect affects the mortality rate of our SMEs, whereby you see somebody starts a business, if anything happens to that person as illness or life-threatening, that's the end of the business, and all the other workers are gone. Very rarely do you see a business that starts and the person started as an SME, and then later you have people that are managing that business and that person has retired. Very few.
And that's throughout the continent?
Mostly across the continent. Some countries where there's trust level is lower, there's criminality, it's even worse. In terms of the medium-sized organizations, capacity is an issue. Our educational systems, some of the organizations, when they hire people, they need to do like a management trainee to put them through, give them work skills. Our educational systems do not tend to give people work skills while at work. You see universities abroad, they give them credits for work while they are in school.
Internships is a must.
Yes, and no, some schools abroad, they give you like 20 hours a week to work while you are in school is allowed. It gives them ability to integrate with the workplace. By the time they graduate, they understand the protocols of working in an establishment.
Absolutely.
So that aspect makes the organizations either invest heavily in the workers, and when they finish the investment, they bond them that for a certain number of years you cannot leave, you have to serve the organization. So that's another issue. Then the issue of power. Electricity is a big issue. Africa, we are not supposed to have issues of power because we have almost summer all year round, sunlight, more sunlight than any part of the world.
Sometimes too much.
We're blessed with wind, you know, we have water. The day we discover our blue economy, we're all surrounded, a continent that is surrounded all over with just one side that has a little land. The three sides are fully oceanic. So, and then the waterways inwards. So the wind, the solar and all that. With renewables, when Africa wakes up to its capacity for renewables, there's no continent on earth that has as much opportunity for renewables like Africa. So the power issue is a challenge. Then security issues. Right. Our policing system and our jurisdiction, legal systems, sanctity of contractual commitments. Because if you are a medium-sized organization and you got an LPO or an invoice to supply something and you've been given and they say this is going to be for 2 years and midway they say they have cancelled it and there's no compensation. Meanwhile, you, the SME, must have negotiated long-term lending or created stock base and then you're stuck. So that's one. Then the bigger ones, they have governance issues. Preparation for people to come to leadership. Most people in many of our systems, we don't learn leadership from birth to 10. We grow people in the technical area, they grow up and they become experts in their technical area, then we put them in charge of people, then as leaders they're flat-footed. But in some cultures around the world, by the time a child is age 10, that child understands rights, understands responsibility to one another, to the environment, to everywhere. That 10-year-old child can give you a lecture on his own personal accountability. We don't have that. So we need to include that into the system. Then there's cybersecurity. Many of our entities are not too conscious about cybersecurity, and we're a vulnerable place for that to happen. And then our community policing and all those kind of things. So these are some of the constraints, depending on the size. It's just like in the jungle, the little animals have their problems.
So to conclude, Dr. Lucy, I think this conversation has been eye-opening. I am African, I belong on the continent, I'm from the continent, but it's really still always revealing for me to hear just the realities and just the fact that we all have our part to play in realizing our aspiration. So to end this conversation, what do leaders then, what would be your advice? What do leaders, both in public and private sectors, need to do to realize opportunities? And what type of partnerships need to be in place? Because I think we're really talking about partnerships, right?
Yes. So one of the things I will speak about, which is what I do when I talk to diaspora Africans who are all over in all the continents, and they are far away and they're looking at Africa, they say, I want to be part of that. How can I be part of that? Nice. And how can I be here and I feel I'm contributing there? Yes. And then also people who are on the continent who are leaders, they say, my organization is not taking that move. My government is not talking to me. And I believe in this. How can I participate in that? So with those kind of conversations, I wrote a book And because of these concerns, I made the book in 3 sections. The individual leader, the leader that is leading a corporate organization, and the leader that is leading a country. Mm-hmm. Our entities seem not to have been good in communicating this vision. Like, do you know we have African Union Anthem, a beautiful song. Each and every one of us should actually own that song. But I was shocked that song can only be sung in certain locations when there are certain category of leaders. Oh. If you go back now, search in YouTube, African National Anthem, African Union Anthem. Okay. When you sing it, you have goosebumps.
Because it speaks to us as a continent.
Each African should hear that. So if you have that as an individual, even if you're invited to the table or not, and you learn this, and if you get to see Agenda 2063, SDGs and all that, as an individual, you can choose a portion that you would take as your own and be doing it in your own corner. I think it's Mother Teresa that said, if each and every one of us sweep the frontage of our houses, the whole world will be clean.
Will be clean.
So each leader can find your point. Even if you now say, okay, there are SDGs, 17 goals. Those 17 goals are about sustainability, wellness of people. And if you take it and you now say, I'm working, 10% of my income, I'm going to be investing in that, in my immediate family and in my neighborhood. I'm not waiting for anybody to invite me. They said, if they invite you to the table, go happily. If they don't invite you to the table, make your own table and bring it by the side. They will find out.
So I think we see how we can all contribute to the Africa we want. Yes. But now specifically in terms of that discussion today, the private sector and its role, from the SMEs to the micro SMEs, all the way to the big players. They all have a role to play, but it's how we all as collective individuals, but also our leaders, both in the public and private sectors, work together towards this aspiration. So we thank you, Dr.
Thank you
Lucy,
so much.
And we welcome you back again and again and again to Uongozi Institute and to Tanzania. And as a friend of, now officially a friend of Uongozi, we wish you all the best.
And a sister.
And a sister.
Asante sana.
Karibu sana.